Welcome to Midday with Reverend Don Lewis. And as you can see, I'm not Reverend Don. I'm Krys Copeland, standing in for Reverend Don today as his guest host. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about Correllian Publishing, but primarily about pagan atheism. And so I will go ahead and share my screen just very quickly here. If you have any comments today, just feel free to drop those in the chat. I would love to hear your comments, your questions, your thought about this topic. Let's see here. Just looking for, yes, I believe this is it. I'm having trouble finding the entire screen, or finding the correct screen, so I'm going to just share the entire screen here and flip it over to this one. So as you can see, we have two new books out on our website. You can search for atheism or pagan atheism to find it. It is titled Nature's Rational Spirit, A Journey into Pagan Atheism. I am the author on it, and I recently actually published this book through Speak Your Own Book. It was a kind of a trial thing that we were doing with just seeing how quickly we could put together a book and get it out there. So it's quite, the original version was quite rough. And now we've decided to give this over to Correllian Publishing to work with so that they can re-release it with a lot more polish to it. So I'm really excited to see this update with this version, and I'll just jump into, we have here the paperback. As you can see, it's priced at $19.99 USD, €19.95 if you're in Europe. And we also have the ebook version, 99 cents or 95 cents. We're still honoring that price. That was something that we mentioned when we first published the book under Speak Your Own Book, was that we wanted this to be accessible for everyone and just put a minimum price of 99 cents on the ebook version. So jumping into it here, you can see that this book is again titled Nature's Rational Spirit, A Journey into Pagan Atheism. And throughout the book, we talk a lot about very complex ideas, because obviously atheism and paganism, at the basic definition of it, seem to be quite polar opposites, right? You have one set of thought or set of belief that there are multiple gods, many gods, an endless number of gods, perhaps even. And on the other extreme with that, you have the idea of atheism, where there are no gods. And so how do you really, a lot of people have the question of how do you really represent both ideas in the idea or in the path of pagan atheism. So throughout the book, I talk about the roots of atheism within pagan traditions around the world. I'm just going to stop sharing here so we can go back to our regular screen, and I can check the chat overlay here. Let's see. Yes. Oh, sorry. Mary asked, where is Lord Don? I believe he is attending an event today. By the way, happy Beltane, everyone. So if you, or at least if you are in the northern hemisphere, if you're in the southern hemisphere today, you are celebrating Samhain. So happy Samhain to those in the southern hemisphere. Hi, Reverend Eric. Good to see you. Hello, Mary. And good afternoon, Antonio. So feel free to drop your comments in the chat. Now, back to our topic with pagan atheism. Like I mentioned, it's quite a dichotomy of beliefs if you look at it in very simple aspects. But like I said, in chapter 1, we go back through the history of the appearance of atheism throughout pagan cultures around the world. One of the cultures we talk about, of course, is Greek culture. And I'm just going to pull up my notes here for this so that I get the names correct, the pronunciation of the names. And yeah, in Greek culture specifically, There were two particular philosophers, and they had this idea of atomism, actually, atom as in atom, like the atom. And I'm just trying to find their names in my notes here. Okay, yes, Epicurus, and the other is Democritus. So both of these philosophers laid the groundwork for this idea that the conventional view of the gods as them physically existing in the universe was not accurate. They weren't actually living up on Mount Olympus. That this was a metaphor or for something else, for the way we view our world, our natural world. And they proposed this idea that the universe was governed by natural laws rather than divine whims. Now, of course, this was prior to the scientific method being established. So at this time, this idea that we were made of atoms, these tiny particles that are invisible to the human eye, and that they make up everything in the universe was quite radical. And it also was not based in science yet at that time. Of course, later on, we've proven atomic theory over and over again. We've now used science and technology to enhance our ability to see at the atomic level and to make those observations. But at this time, it was not possible. So this was just a philosophy, an idea, a thought, and that the universe was composed of all these different atoms, these small, indestructible units. Now, of course, with the caveat there that they are not necessarily indestructible. We have learned that, and we have learned how to create energy or even weapons with atoms at this point through the atomic bomb. But at this time, this was the only thing that we could rationalize about the idea of atoms, that you couldn't break them up into something smaller than that. And of course, at some level, at least at the elemental level, that is true. The atoms are the basic unit of an element. So this was, of course, very radical at the time, and now it's considered scientific fact. So it's interesting that atheism actually started out as a religion, or at least science in that particular case started out as religious in nature. And we see that in scientific areas all around the world. Oftentimes, the scholars of the world were also the priests and priestesses of the world. So that's not necessarily anything that is new or uncommon. It's certainly something quite ancient and very broad. Now, moving on to ancient India, there were also some interesting thoughts going around during that time as well, including about this idea of recursive cosmology, where atoms and universes reflect similar structures, and the universe is cyclically created and destroyed. And in fact, on the broader scope of things, science has proved that we, have this point of a big bang, an expansion, and then it at some point, some scientists say, or at least a lot of scientists agree, that it will collapse again. Now, of course, this is something that is very hard to prove because we don't have any measurements to accurately predict the long-term process of what the future will be beyond just maybe even a few decades, or maybe a few centuries. So outside of that, it gets too chaotic to accurately predict. Now, these texts from ancient Hindu scriptures, like the Puranas, describing this cycle, again, some of this has already been proven, not just with the universe possibly being cyclical, in which there will be this big bang and this expansion and then this collapse again, but also that there's this idea that universes may actually be atoms for other universes. So that gets pretty wild and pretty out there, but it's also a concept that has made a resurgence in modern day. There are a lot of people who believe in the multi-universe theory, including well-educated scientists around the world. So this is not something that is new by any means, nor is it something that is radical in scientific thought of today. Um, so there's also this other school that came out in India at the time, and I just am going to check the chat here before we move on to that. Let's see. Hi, Reverend Mary. Unfortunately, Reverend Don is not able to be here today, but I will be in the chat for today and be answering questions about pagan atheism and the roots of atheism within pagan cultures. Secondly, we also have Reverend Eric in the chat. Blessed Beltane and Blessed Samhain. Blessed Beltane to Mary as well. And hi, Nikki. Good to see you as well. All right. Okay, so back to the topic of the roots of atheism within India. At that time, there was also this school of thought going around in India called the Charvaka school. It's also called the Lokiata school, and it stood out for its rigorous skepticism and materialistic stance. So this was a little bit more in the extremes of atheism. The majority of atheists do not in any way promote the ability of or the idea of getting ahead through causing harm to others. The majority of atheists have a similar thought to pagans on that whatever harm we send out will come back to us. Atheists for scientific reasons, pagans for spiritual reasons, or possibly with most of us a combination of those things. So the Charvaka is a bit extreme in that sense. I do want to just preface it with that statement. But it was something that challenged this fundamental idea of the Vedic traditions about how you have to maybe do a certain set of postures or prayers or offerings or things like this in order to have a good afterlife. The Charvakas denied the existence of an afterlife and dismissed this theory of karma, refuting the existence of deities and suggesting instead that the perception is the only real source of knowledge. Now, scientifically, that's also been something that's been circulating around recently in regards to quantum mechanics. We'll get into that a bit later if we have time, but for the purposes of the conversation around perception, many quantum physics theorists believe that or say that or show that in their studies that particles can exist at different points in time and space simultaneously. So, and it is only when we observe it that it becomes finalized, that it becomes fixed. So based on that idea, this also the Charvakas had this portion of it right, at least the science about it, or in their belief of thought, the philosophy of it, since it wasn't a science at the time. But that perception really is our source of knowledge, that we have to observe our environment around us and learn from it, and then survive and try to thrive in it. An interesting caveat to this idea is the suggestions from Jacques Fresco, who was part of the Venus Project. He passed away some years ago, but the project is still ongoing, though I'm not sure how active it is right now. But he was a behaviorist, and he suggested that all human behavior is trained by our environment, that we don't really have a lot of free will. He's not the only person to believe this. He's not even the first person to believe this. But his conclusion based on that was that if you're in a certain set of circumstances that require you to do something you wouldn't normally do for survival, like let's say defend yourself against an attacker, it's better for you in that situation to respond based on what you're seeing and what you're feeling to defend yourself in order to survive, just talking about the basics of survival. And so that idea was also involved with this as well, but possibly taken to more of an extreme. as in, taking what you need from the environment without giving thought to the rest of the participants in that environment. All right, and now we'll move on to ancient China. I'll just check the chat again for any comments. Well, thank you, Mary. I appreciate your comment. Mary says this is fascinating. It absolutely is, and I get super passionate about it too. So I may tend to ramble or talk a bit quickly, but it's just because I'm very excited about it. If I'm talking a little bit too fast, maybe drop out now and check out the replay and slow that down. But I will also try to monitor my speed as well. So over in ancient China, of course, the immediate ideas that come up with in regards to atheistic or atheistic thought is Confucianism. And so the figure who was pivotal to this tradition, Zunzi, also known as Confucius, was a pivotal figure in this tradition. And it was an intellectual tradition. It wasn't, say a certain number of prayers and do it a certain way and give a certain offering and all will be well. It was intellectual. So it asserted that the events of this world are dictated not by supernatural forces from gods or deities or spirits, but by human actions and natural laws. He also emphasized that heaven does not act out of will or moral purpose, and that humans must rely on their own ethics and efforts to shape their destiny. So he doesn't flat out say there's no heaven. What he does say is that heaven does not interfere, or this world beyond us does not interfere with our world in any direct way. Now, this perspective was also complemented by the works of Wang Chong. He was a later Han Dynasty philosopher, and he really openly criticized the superstitions and the fatalistic beliefs during that time. So Wang Chong's rational approach advocated for rigorous examination of claims and based on evidence and reason. So some of the earlier ideas for science, some of the earliest forms of science come from this thought. So these ideas not only challenged the prevailing spiritual doctrines, but also cultivated a culture of inquiry and skepticism into Chinese culture. And this pursues into modern day in China. So there are surveys from different research centers around the world that, including the Peking University in Beijing, Purdue University in Indiana, and the Pew Research Center, that indicate that nearly half of modern Chinese people are atheist, are non-religious in any way, or agnostic. All right, so I'm just going to check our time here and check our chats. Okay, we're good to go there. So the next point of conversation that I wanted to bring up was ancient Egypt. So there's really not a lot of suggestion that any particular person in ancient Egypt was an outspoken philosopher of some form of atheism. But what we do see is something interesting with Akhenaten. Now, you might remember this is the father of Tutankhamun, or Tutankhamun, who is the famous, young king that died, I believe, at 20 or 21. And Akhenaten was his heretical father. If you're familiar with the story, you'll already know that this involved a monotheistic religion that focused on the worshiping of the sun disk, but it was quite abstract in thought. It wasn't literally the sun, but just this idea of life. And the religious practices did still center around a deity, a single deity in this case, but it also really questioned the role of the powerful priestly classes that served the pantheon of the traditional gods at the time. And, it pains me to know that the priests and priestesses from that time could be quite abusive towards the local population, towards forcing the local population to give gifts and things like this. But it is a fact of that time. It did happen. And so the priests and priestesses, while pagan, were not following a modern ethical pagan practice in the same way that we follow today. And because of that, Akhenaten wanted to lessen the power of the priestly class that was causing all of these burdens onto the people. And so his religion reduced the god's role in daily life and emphasized a direct connection between the pharaoh and the divine. So he's still just replacing deity with another deity himself. But he insists that there are no other traditional gods and that we do not need to give all these sacrifices to them. So that's the only real connection that I could find in my research for ancient Egypt. But it was an interesting one because of the connection to the idea that he was uprooting a somewhat evil or vindictive priestly class, and was murdered for it immediately afterwards. So, and his son had to take back the name of Tutankhamun and worship Amun and the other gods again. So, it's an interesting part of ancient Egyptian history at the very least. Turning to ancient Rome, and I'm just going to check our chat again. Yeah, corruption can happen in any organization. That's absolutely right, Mary. Excellently put. And so now let's turn it over to ancient Rome. So we're going to talk a little bit about the poet and philosopher Lucretius. He provided a really stark counterpoint to prevailing religious practices with this epic that he wrote, De Rerum Natura, which means on the nature of things. And I'm probably butchering some of this Egyptian, Greek, and now Latin language. So please excuse me if I mispronounce some of them. Lucretius argued that the world is composed of only of atoms, just like his counterparts in Greece around the same time, and dismissed this notion of divine intervention in worldly affairs. He also proposed that fear of the divine was based on ignorance, and that understanding the natural world's workings could liberate individuals from this fear. And that has also kind of proven out to be true because as we use technology to take more control over our natural environment, sometimes at the expense of the natural environment or the expense of damage to the natural environment. But that we are able to, use technology, use science to create a space that is temperature controlled, that is protected from high winds or high flood waters. We can use our technology to do that. And that the more that we understood the natural world's workings, the better we could create our own lives. We can manipulate this natural world around us to better serve us. So that was the beginning of centering humanism around this. Of course, we're still missing that component of protecting the environment, though one could argue that if you take Lucretius's logic out even further, if we don't treat our environment with respect and with care, then eventually that environment will no longer produce the things that we need in order to have a nice, comfortable place to live on this very comfortable earth. And we can already see that getting worse around the world with climate change. So hopefully if humanity embraces these kinds of ideas more and more over the years, and I think it is moving in that direction, that we will be able to come back into balance at some point with our environment. And just checking the chat here again. All right, we're good to go there. So The last thing that I wanted to mention today was indigenous traditions around the world. Now, of course, many of these are pantheistic and animistic in view, depending on what part of the world you're in, or even in certain parts of the world, like here, well, in North America, where Native American tribes are. There are some that have animistic views, there are some that have pantheistic views, there are some that have polytheistic views, all within a relatively small geography of each other. So the spirituality within indigenous traditions is generally deeply entwined with the natural world, rather than centralized and distinct anthropomorphic deities. So might have a coyote, but coyote is a general spirit, and not necessarily a physical form. Though in some cultures, it does take the physical form of coyote, or maybe a person who is a trickster, something like that. But its true form is not anthropomorphic. So in many of these cultures, the divine is seen as permeating all aspects of the environment, so that no single entity has supreme authority over any other. That everything is in balance with each other, taking and giving as it needs. And many Native American beliefs emphasize this sacredness in all living things. So that's also true in other parts of the world with other indigenous tribes. So this reflects on an interconnectivity rather than a hierarchy dominated by gods. That they are paying honor and respect to the spirits that they connect with, and not praying in order to receive favor, or a special blessing or boon from that god, or in the afterlife, maybe in the present life, but not something that will happen in the afterlife. Typically speaking, they're not doing it so that they can not avoid hell and go to heaven, for example. And this holistic view challenges the conventional distinctions between the sacred and the profane. So it promotes a worldview where spiritual essence is a collective attribute rather than the domain of specific divine beings. So that was the conversation that I wanted to have around indigenous tribes and their possible, or at least less theistic views. Maybe not atheistic, but less theistic views. So where does this intersection happen then? How does paganism? How can you be both pagan and be atheist? So just like modern humans, right? There are many of us who do not believe that there is a physical God is sitting up on Mount Olympus or somewhere, or physical God sitting, up on the moon, or in the sun. We don't literally believe that. Many of us. In the majority of other religions, that's the same way. Most progressive Jewish people do not believe in a literal God. Most progressive Christians do not believe in a literal God, or a literal hell, or a literal heaven. These are allegories for how we should live our lives, and not concrete scientific facts. And even in ancient paganism, there were still those people that had those ideas, those same ideas. And that's the same in modern day paganism. There are many of us who may not literally believe in fairies, but we love the idea of fairies. And we can draw on the emotions that we have when we think of fairies, or the attributes that we believe fairies might possess if they did exist. And we can channel those, and think about those as something that we can have within ourselves and reflect. From ourselves. And that's true with any concept. A crystal may not, have literal magic powers, but it makes you feel better when you hold it, and therefore you do perform better on that test, or you do sound more confident in that interview, not because of any specific power of the crystal itself, but because of the power that you imbued into it. And so that's where you can still believe in spell work, and in magic, and in connecting with these spiritual entities um, in a metaphorical way, so that you can develop something within yourself or within the world. Maybe you want to manifest this as something to make the world around you a better place. That's also very logical to do, and it really sets up project management skills when you're doing spell work. That's really the bottom line is, you're sitting down, you're thinking about the problem that you have, you're picturing your success, and then you're planning step by step how to get yourself from where you're at now to the successful point you want to be. That's the basic idea behind spell work. That's the basic idea behind project management. All right, so we have come at the end of our hour, and in honor of Reverend Don's tradition of closing with a prayer, I would like to also do that. However, I'd like to offer our prayer as a moment of reflection from a pagan atheist perspective. So let us appreciate the natural world around us and the connections that bind us. May we act with respect for all life, fostering peace and gratitude in our hearts. Thank you for sharing this time with me, and may you carry a sense of wonder and responsibility as you move through your days on Gaia. To all beings and energy forms in this universe, we are one. May we part in peace always and come together again soon. Blessed be. And if you'd like to check out the book on Correllian Publishing, just visit correllianpublishing.com, and I will see